and his response to it. One thing that's really hard to really come to grips with is the Indian Removal Act of 1830. So essentially what happened was, as people were moving westward, Jackson wanted the Indians removed, and many other people did too, off of this potentially great farmland, okay? In addition to that, there was actually gold that was found in northern Georgia. So Jackson passes, or the Congress passes, Jackson signs into law the Indian Removal Act, which, removed the 5 civilized tribes. So for the most part, even though a lot of them were obviously very upset, they move except for the Cherokee. The Cherokee had been promised by General Washington, by President Washington, that if they kind of acclimated, assimilated to this white type environment, that they would be left alone. And so the Cherokee do. They become very, very assimilated. They form their own schools. They write their own new languages. And so they do what they think that white people would do, and that is that they take the federal government to court. Okay? And there's actually a couple of big cases, but the one I want to point out is the case of Worcester versus Georgia. So essentially what happened, this is much more explanation to this than what I'm giving it, but what essentially happened is that Georgia, in Worcester versus Georgia, John Marshall says that Indian nations actually have their own political identity, and says that what Georgia and what the national government doing is violating the treaties they had with Washington. So Jackson doesn't abide by this treaty or by this ruling. He says, John Marshall has made his decision, now let him enforce it, which essentially said he was going to do it anyway. So Jackson pushes for the removal of the Indians. It's actually during the next election, it was actually his buddy Martin Van Buren that does this, but he starts to push this forward, sending troops down to Georgia to forcibly remove the Cherokee, 16,000 of them along what's now known as the Trail of Tears. A quarter of them die, which is 4,000 of them, mostly women and children, old people and children, because they just weren't as fit for the journey. Okay. So the next thing was this issue over the bank. President Jackson absolutely hated the National Bank. He thought it supported the Northerners, does not help the common men, and he goes to war with Nicholas Biddle, who is actually the president of the bank. And so, this war kind of ensues over whether or not the bank should even exist. And Jackson wins this war. He does many things, like literally firing about 6 or 7 different secretaries of Treasury because he wanted the money physically moved from the federal bank to the state or the pet banks, okay? But the other thing he does is he vetoes the rechartering of the bank when it comes up, okay? And this is part of him using that veto as a weapon. So it was very difficult to get the 2/3 majority to override a veto. And so essentially when he gets reelected in 1832, this veto essentially the bank essentially just dies out. Okay, and to wrap it up, I've got this last clip for you on the final part of